Sir, I need you to leave. Right now. The voice of Staff Sergeant Brandon Coyle cut across the corridor outside the Fort Bragg graduation auditorium with the clipped authority of a man who had decided something and was not interested in discussing it. He was 27 years old, broad-shouldered, and wore his dress uniform with the immaculate precision of someone who understood that appearances were the first thing any superior officer evaluated. He stood in the doorway with his arms slightly out from his sides, the posture of a man making himself larger than the situation required. And he was looking at an old man in civilian clothes who had, in Coyle's estimation, caused enough of a disruption already. The old man did not leave. His name was Francis Gerald Dowd, and he was 82 years old. He stood in the corridor outside Auditorium A with the stillness of something that had been standing for a very long time and had learned that most things asking it to move were not worth moving for. He wore a plain dark suit that had been pressed carefully that morning, a white shirt, and a tie the color of deep water. His posture was the posture of a man whose spine had been taught by something other than comfort, rooted, unhurried, the stillness of weathered granite rather than held breath. His hands at his sides were large, and still, the knuckles like polished river stones. The skin, the color and texture of old leather worked to softness. On his right hand, at the wrist where the suit jacket ended, a tattoo emerged, dark ink on dark skin, old enough to have softened at the edges, its design not immediately legible, but carrying the weight of something deliberate, something that had been put there when it mattered. He had driven 4 hours that morning from his home in Fayetteville to watch his grandson, Specialist Marcus Dowd, graduate from the Army's Advanced Infantry course. He had a printed invitation in his jacket pocket, formal, official, bearing the base insignia and the graduation ceremony details. He had arrived 40 minutes early because he was 82 years old and had been taught that you arrived early to everything that mattered. He had been directed to a seating area in the second row, center section, by a young private who had checked his invitation and shown him to the seat with appropriate courtesy. The problem, according to Staff Sergeant Coyle, was the suit. Specifically, the absence of a uniform. Coyle had arrived at the auditorium to conduct a final walk through 20 minutes before the ceremony and had found the seating arrangement for distinguished guests, a section reserved, per the ceremony program, for senior officers, unit commanders, and honored veterans, occupied in its front row by an old man in civilian clothes. The section had a placard. The placard said Distinguished Guests, Active Duty A&D Veteran Uniform Required. Coyle had informed the old man of the requirement. The old man had looked at the placard and then at Coyle and said, quietly, that he had been told to sit there. Coyle had said that the policy was clear. The old man had said that he did not own a uniform anymore, that he had not worn a uniform in 41 years, and that he had an invitation. Coyle had said the invitation did not supersede the uniform requirement for that section. They had been in the corridor for 4 minutes. I have driven 4 hours, Francis said. His voice was a low, settled sound. A sound that did not rise or quicken, the voice of a man who had long since discovered that volume was not the same thing as weight. My grandson is receiving his certificate in approximately 35 minutes. I have an invitation. I would like to sit down, and I would like you to use one of the general seating sections, Coyle said. He had his clipboard. He gestured with it down the corridor toward the main auditorium entrance. There are open seats in the back 3 rows. You'll be able to see everything clearly. I was told the front section. I'm telling you different. Francis looked at him. His eyes were gray, the deep, particular gray of a winter river, carrying within it a depth that had nothing to do with water and everything to do with accumulated time. The depth of a man who had looked at worse things than a young sergeant with a clipboard and had not blinked. He looked at Coyle the way a man looks at weather, noting it, assessing it, deciding what it required. "You don't know who this man is," said a voice from behind Coyle. He turned. A corporal named James Reeves had been posted at the auditorium door and had been watching the exchange for the past 3 minutes with the growing discomfort of someone who is watching something wrong happen in slow motion and has not yet found the moment to intervene. He was 23 years old. He had grown up 20 miles from Fort Bragg, and his grandfather had been an army man who had told him stories, specific, careful stories, about specific, careful men, and something in the way Francis Dowd was standing in this corridor was activating a recognition he could not yet name. "Reeves," Coyle said, his voice carrying the warning of rank, "I did not ask for your input." I know Sergeant Reeves did not back up. "But I think we should check something before I think we should look at his invitation again, sir. There might be a designation on it." Coyle's jaw tightened. He was performing for an audience of one now, the old man, and the corporal's intervention had complicated the performance. The invitation is not the issue. The uniform requirement is, the invitation has a gold seal on it, Reeves said. "I saw it when he showed it the first time. That seal is not the standard ceremony invitation. That's the commanding general's personal invitation." A pause. Coyle looked at Francis. "Let me see it." Francis reached into his jacket pocket with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has been patient this long and can be patient a little longer, and produced the invitation. Coyle took it. He looked at it. The gold seal was there, a specific embossed seal that Coyle recognized after a moment as the office of the base commanding general, which was different from the standard ceremony invitation seal in ways he had never specifically cataloged before, but was cataloging rapidly now. The words at the bottom of the invitation, in smaller print, read, "At the personal request of Commanding General Stanton, this guest is to be afforded all courtesies of the Distinguished Guest section without restriction." Coyle read it twice. His face underwent a series of adjustments. Francis said nothing. "This is," Coyle began. He stopped. He looked at the old man. "How do you know General Stanton?" "We've met," Francis said. Coyle looked at the invitation again. He looked at Francis. The situation had become something he had not been trained for, which was to say a situation where his own authority had turned out to be considerably smaller than the situation required. He made a decision that was partly face-saving and partly genuine uncertainty. He took a step back and said, "Wait, here," and walked down the corridor to find someone senior to himself. He found Master Sergeant Dolores Webb outside the ENCO staging area, going over the ceremony order with 2 junior enlisted soldiers. He showed her the invitation. She read it. She looked at him. She said, "Where is he now?" "Outside A, Sergeant," and you put him in the corridor. It was not a question. The uniform requirement, Coyle, her voice was not loud. It had the specific compression of a voice that has learned to carry maximum weight at minimum volume. "Go find Chaplain Harris and stay with him until this ceremony starts. I will handle this." Coyle left. Master Sergeant Webb did not immediately go to the corridor. Instead, she stood for a moment with the invitation in her hand, looking at the gold seal and the note at the bottom. And she thought about something that had been sitting in the back of her memory since she first read a name in the ceremony briefing materials 3 days ago. A name in the distinguished guest list that she had noticed and set aside because there was too much to organize, and she had not had time to follow the thread. She thought about it now. She thought about why the commanding general would issue a personal invitation to a man attending his grandson's graduation and note explicitly that he was to be afforded all courtesies without restriction. She thought about what kind of man required that notation. She went to the corridor. She introduced herself. She apologized for the confusion with a formality that communicated she understood what kind of confusion it was. She showed Francis Dowd to the front row of the distinguished guest section and brought him a program and a cup of coffee and left him with the promise that Specialist Marcus Dowd's family would be directed to the same section after the ceremony. Then she went back to the ENCO staging area, sat down at the desk, and called the commanding general's aide. "I need to ask about the personal invitation issued for the Dowd graduation," she said. "Francis Gerald Dowd." "Can you tell me?" "Yes," said the aide, and there was something in the single word that made Webb sit straighter. "What's the situation?" she told him. "The invitation, Coyle, the corridor, the resolution." She was brief and factual. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. When the aide's voice returned, it had changed, tighter, compressed to urgency. All professional buffer gone. "Is he all right?" "He's fine. He's seated. The ceremony is in 22 minutes. I need to brief the general immediately. Do not let him leave that section under any circumstances. Do you understand me? If anyone else challenges him, you call this number directly." "Understood. Can you tell me?" "The general will be there before the ceremony concludes," the aide said. "That's all I can say right now." The call ended. Webb held the phone for a moment and looked at nothing in particular and understood that she had been in the presence of something this morning that she had not fully recognized, and that the recognition was arriving now the way recognitions always arrive. Too late to change what had already happened, but not too late to matter. In the auditorium, Francis Dowd sat in the front row of the distinguished guest section with his program and his coffee and his hands resting in his lap with the ease of a man entirely comfortable in his own company. Around him, the section filled gradually with officers in their dress uniforms. Colonels, lieutenant colonels, a few full birds, a general's aide who sat 2 seats away and glanced at him once and then away. The auditorium filled with the sounds of a ceremony assembling, the murmur of families, the shuffle of feet, the precise mechanical sounds of an institutional event that had been run many times and knew its own rhythms. Francis read the ceremony program once, carefully, beginning to end. He found his grandson's name in the list of graduates and read it twice. Then he folded the program and held it in both hands and was still, the way he had been still in the corridor and the way he had been still in other places, in other corridors, in other rooms where people had looked at him and seen an old man in civilian clothes and made their determinations. He had not always been 78 years old in a dark suit. He had been 21 in a uniform that meant something specific, assigned to a unit whose designation meant something more specific, given a set of orders in the late summer of 1966 that had taken him somewhere the orders did not name by its public name. He had served in that unnamed place for 2 years, and then in a second deployment in an adjacent unnamed place for 18 months. And in the course of those 3.5 years, he had done things that were documented in classified files that would not be fully declassified until 2031. Things that had involved the kind of work that could not be announced or celebrated or worn on a uniform because the work required that no one know it was happening. There was a photograph in the classified archive taken in 1968 that showed 11 men standing in front of a structure that was not identified in the caption. The men were young. They were not in uniform. They were looking at the camera with the expressions of men who understood that the photograph itself was a risk, that it would be filed and sealed and not looked at again for a long time. In the photograph, one of the men, a young man with large hands and a direct gaze, had his right wrist turned slightly toward the camera, and on that wrist, partially visible, was a tattoo that would not be formally associated with the unit's designation until a historian cross referenced it against 3 separate classified sources in 2009. The tattoo on Francis Dowd's wrist. The ceremony began. The graduates filed in with the precise, practiced choreography of young soldiers who had drilled this entry enough times to make it automatic. Francis found his grandson in the third row, tall, straight, moving with the specific physical confidence that the infantry course built, and that Francis recognized the way you recognize something you once had yourself. His jaw did the thing it did in moments like this, a slight tightening, involuntary, the physical compression of an emotion being managed. He watched his grandson cross the stage and receive the certificate and return to rank, and something in his chest settled in the way of a long-held weight finding its proper place. The ceremony was 45 minutes. Francis sat through it with his program folded in his hands and his coffee long cold and his eyes on the stage. And he did not think about the corridor or the staff sergeant with the clipboard. He thought about Marcus, about the drive from Fayetteville, about the specific quality of light in the auditorium and how it reminded him of other rooms where he had sat and watched young people become something. He was standing in the lobby after the ceremony, waiting in the organized chaos of families finding their graduates, when the doors at the main entrance opened and the noise shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way noise shifts when something with weight enters a room, a subtle redistribution of attention, a slight quieting of adjacent conversations, the way a crowd unconsciously orients toward a new gravitational center. Major General Theodore Stanton came through the main doors with the contained speed of a man who has moved from one urgency to another and has not yet stopped moving. He was in dress uniform, 2 stars on his shoulders, and he had the bearing of a man who had been in important rooms for a long time, but had not allowed the rooms to become more important than the people in them. His aide was a half step behind. 2 other officers followed. He was scanning the lobby with the focused efficiency of a man looking for a specific person. He found Francis Dowd. He crossed the lobby with the directness of a man who has been wanting to make this crossing for some time and is finally making it. The conversations nearest to him slowed and stopped the way water stops at a dam. Families turned. Graduates turned. Staff Sergeant Coyle, standing near the door with his clipboard, turned, and his face went through several changes in rapid sequence. General Stanton stopped in front of Francis Dowd. He looked at him, at the dark suit, the white shirt, the deep water tie, the hands, the wrist, the tattoo. And he looked at him with the expression of a man who has carried a piece of knowledge for a long time and is now in the presence of its source. He raised his hand and delivered the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute that anyone in that lobby had ever witnessed. Snapped from the shoulder with a formality that was not performance, it was conviction. The salute of a man who knows exactly what he is saluting and has been thinking about how he would do it if he ever had the occasion. The lobby went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something impossible happens in plain sight. Francis Dowd looked at the general. His gray eyes moved across the man's face with the unhurried attention of a man reading conditions. Then he straightened, not abruptly, not sharply, but with the complete deliberateness of a man who has been called to attention by something that deserves the response. And he returned the salute with a precision that communicated 41 years of absence had not diminished the knowledge of how it was done. General Stanton lowered his hand. He turned to the room. "My name is Major General Theodore Stanton, Fort Bragg Commanding General." His voice was clear and carried without effort. "The man standing before me is Francis Gerald Dowd, Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired. His service designation, which has been declassified by the relevant authority and which I have been given permission to state, is MACSOG, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group, a special operations unit so classified during its operational period that its members were officially listed as civilian advisors. They did not wear rank. They did not wear unit insignia. They did not receive public recognition. They were ordered to deny the unit's existence if asked. He looked at the lobby, at the graduates, at the families, at Staff Sergeant Coyle with his clipboard. Sergeant Major Dowd served 4 years in that designation. He conducted 47 cross-border operations. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second-highest military decoration, for actions that cannot be fully described in an unclassified setting. He was awarded the Silver Star twice and the Bronze Star with Valor on 3 separate occasions. He was wounded in the course of his service and did not report the wound at the time because reporting it would have required acknowledging an operation that officially was not occurring. He paused. In the silence, the lobby held its breath. He did not come here today to be recognized. He came to watch his grandson graduate. He arrived 40 minutes early. He had a personal invitation from this office. His eyes moved to Coyle, and they were not angry. They were the eyes of a man making a permanent record. He was put in the corridor and told to move to the back of the room. A sound moved through the lobby that was not quite audible, more felt than heard, a collective internal adjustment in 20 or 30 people who were in the process of understanding something. Coyle did not move. His clipboard was at his side. His face had the particular gray quality of a man who has understood completely the full dimension of what he has done. Sergeant Major Dowd, General Stanton said, turning back to Francis, on behalf of Fort Bragg and the United States Army, I apologize for this morning. You deserved better from this installation. Francis looked at the general for a moment. Then he said, I found my seat. His voice was the settled, unhurried sound it had always been. My grandson graduated. That's what I came for. The general allowed himself something that was almost a smile, the expression of a man who had expected that answer and been braced for it, and was quietly grateful for it anyway. He said, He's a fine soldier. He comes from good stock. He does his own work, Francis said. I had nothing to do with it. The general looked at him. That, he said quietly, is exactly something you would say. 2 months later, Staff Sergeant Brandon Coyle requested a transfer. The transfer paperwork cited a desire for a different posting. What it did not cite, and what Coyle wrote in a letter he carried in his wallet for a long time after, was this. I asked a man to go to the back of the room when he had already spent his life making sure there was a room to stand in. I didn't know who he was. I should not have needed to know who he was. The letter was not addressed to anyone. It was addressed to a standard he had failed to meet, so that he could carry the standard with him and not fail it again. Specialist Marcus Dowd, who had seen his grandfather standing with a 2-star general in the lobby of his graduation ceremony, did not ask about it until dinner that evening, at a restaurant in Fayetteville where Francis had requested a table in the back. He waited until after the food came, and then he said, Grandpa, what was that? Francis looked at him. At the young face with its new soldier's confidence, the face that had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw and something around the mouth that was Francis's own, passed down through years and distance. He was quiet for a moment. That was somebody being polite, he said. Marcus looked at him. He was 21. He was beginning, in the way of 21-year-olds who have just been through something that asks something real of them, to understand that the distance between what a man said and what he meant was often the most important distance in any conversation. That was a 2-star general saluting you in a lobby full of people, he said. Yes, Francis agreed. He picked up his fork. And before that, I was in a corridor with a young sergeant who needed to learn something. Both things happened. Both of them matter. He looked at his grandson across the table. This young man, this soldier, this continuation of something. And he thought about corridors and lobbies and all the rooms a man walks through in a life, and how the rooms eventually stop mattering and what remains is the quality of how you walked through them. The particular stillness you brought. The things you carried without announcing them. The way you stood in the corridor when someone told you to go to the back, and you said, "I would like to sit down," and meant it. And waited. There are men among us who were ordered to be invisible and spent their lives being invisible so that others could be seen. They drive to graduations 4 hours early. They press their suits the night before. They sit in lobbies after ceremonies and watch their grandchildren with the expression of a man seeing what all of it was for. They do not ask to be known. They ask only what Francis Dowd asked in that corridor, in the simplest possible terms, to sit down. To be present for the thing that mattered. And sometimes, if we are paying attention, we see them. And sometimes, even if we are not, a general walks through the door. If you were moved by Francis's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.